Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Follow that, as they say. My name, as you've heard, is Graham Palfery Smith, and I'm here to talk to you about how to increase profit and the exit value of your business, focusing specifically on recruitment businesses. I'm personally involved in others, but we're looking specifically at recruitment businesses today. And I'm going to concentrate very much on the latter part of that statement. To start with telling a little bit about my background, who I am. I do know a few people in the audience, but not all of you know me, so I'm going to explain a little bit about my background and why JP felt it appropriate to be up here trying to keep you awake after lunch. I'm going to talk a little bit about multiples and timing. Whenever anyone wants to know about M&A, they want to know how much they can get and when they can get it. So I'm going to deal with that early on. And then I'm going to look at a few slides on how to increase value, going into a little bit of detail about some non-exec, what a non-exec director is and does, talking about a compliancy scenario which has arisen recently, which I thought was quite valuable. And then I'm going to finish with a few lists of don'ts, things not to do if you do want to sell your business effectively and make some money out of it. So, who I am, I've been in the recruitment industry since the beginning of the 80s, started in what was then known as EDP and WP, now known collectively as IT, and moved into financial recruitment early in the 80s with Badenoch & Clark, joined Alexander Badenoch and David Clark. For some bizarre reason, they decided not to call it Badenoch, Clark and Palfery Smith. I'm astonished, really, because I thought it tripped off the tongue. Spent a few years with them building that business up, and then moved to a business called Harrison Willis, which was a very small 5-person financial recruitment company, just gone through a very small MBO, and built that business up to about 450 people over a period of about 15 years. Built it largely organically, one small acquisition, and then did a management buyout, bought the business off my partner, floated it on the stock exchange and sold it to TMP. Stayed for a while with TMP, now split into Hudson and Monster, of course, and a shadow of its former self, if I may say so, buying businesses for them. Looked at 300 companies for them over the space of 12 months and bought 12 of them. Then I went and had a short spell with Robert Walters. Lesson there, don't work with mates or peers. We're both still talking, but only barely. I then went and built a business called 510, which I'm proud to say was the third fastest growing recruitment company in the Sunday Times Fast Track in 2007, and the fastest in 2008. Left them and went to work for a Japanese billionaire controlling his global recruitment interests, which took me as far afield as Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, right across the world, and saw some very interesting ways of doing what we do and what we would take as given, whether it was payroll, contractor management, or straightforward recruitment, or staffing, as they call it in North America. I've been involved in MBOs, MBIs, my personal favourite, bimbos. I've done flotations, full listing flotations, both here and in the States, and numerous trade transactions. I'm currently non-exec director or board advisor to 8 businesses. You're going to hear from one of them this afternoon. I was an ambassador for APSCO, helping them with the transition from the Technical Staffing Company Association into the Professional Staffing Company Association for 4 years, and coming off the board in April this year. I'm a guest executive consultant for Lander Associates, and I've done more than 50 transactions. In fact, there's quite a few more than 50 now. We're in the middle of 2 fundraisings at the moment as I speak, and I'm selling one in the States and going to get a call later on about selling another one in Australia. So quite a lot going on at the moment, and I've raised in excess of £250 million for owners, principals, sadly not all mine. So the first slide relating to how to get the most value is all about when is the right time to do it. A very wise man called James Wellesley Wesley, that some of you will have had the privilege to hear speak, once told me that in bad times you can sell a good business. In good times you can sell good and bad businesses. But you can only sell good businesses. You can only sell bad businesses or average businesses in a bad time, in a good time. Now is a bad time, unequivocally. I don't have to tell you what's happening in the UK market. I imagine most of you operate in the UK market. We have a lot of issues, socio-political and certainly economic. America isn't going to drag us out of it. They're looking at just under $17 trillion of debt this year. Whoever gets elected in November, by the next election in 2016, they're going to be well over 20 trillion which is well above the size of their economy, even at that point. China's not going to drag us out of it, and the Eurozone, they're running around like headless chickens. So it's not a good time at the moment to sell your business. That isn't to say that there aren't people making money. There are, and there are businesses that can sell. There are deals that will be done, and there have been deals done recently. Some of the deals you will have seen recently, there's some very good deals done quite recently, have been in gestation for many months, and in one particular case for nearly 2.5 years. In terms of multiples, I'm always reluctant to talk about multiples because it is one of those things, there's more bollocks talked about multiples in M&A than there is about anything else. I met somebody at a conference not so long ago who'd worked. He was a junior manager in a company that I bought a couple of years previously. And he didn't know who I was, and he was telling me about this amazing deal that his bosses had done and how much money they'd made out of it. And so I asked him what the multiple was, and he came up with some extraordinary number, which I didn't recognise at all. So I explained who I was and asked him where he'd got that number from. He gave me the source, and I rang the source and said, where did this come from? And he said, oh, perhaps I was exaggerating a little bit. What I did is I took one of the earlier years rather than the year you did the deal on, and I worked the multiple out from that. So it was about 4 times what we'd actually paid. So multiples are meaningless. It's about the total amount. Having said that, I know everybody wants to know what the multiples are. Generally in our marketplace, it's between 3 and 8 times EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. There are deals obviously done outside that range. In the current times, there are an awful lot done under that range. A number of the deals you will have seen as acquisitions, or touted as acquisitions, in the last 18 months have actually been for no consideration. So in other words, somebody's given themselves to somebody else because they're having issues, cash flow problems, whatever. And there are deals done above it. There's a great business called James Harvard, which Hayes bought 4 or 5 years ago now, at more than 16 times EBITDA. They wanted pharma and they wanted Tokyo, and James Harvard was really good in both. So that was, however, an exception. Not many deals, private company deals, are done in those sorts of ranges. So the true multiples, 3 to 8, currently 3 to 5. I was advising somebody this morning, and that's a very good business, very tidy business, very cash generative, but realistically they won't get more than 5 if they sell it in the next year. One of the things that I'll mention several times throughout this presentation is the need to plan, the need to be aware of what's happening and what you want to be doing and where you want to be going. But in terms of timing an exit, getting the exit right and getting the maximum value for it, it's very difficult to do that. So you need to make sure everything, all your ducks are, so to speak, in a row, and that you can still be opportunistic, because the buyers will come back at some stage. There is still plenty of money around. There's lots of money in the capital markets washing around, and there will be deals done. So be opportunistic, get everything ready, and be ready to go. Key ways to increase value. The first one is obvious: consistent, recurring, and visible profitability. It's absolutely no good having 3 bad years, 1 great one, and then trying to sell. It doesn't work like that. Whoever buys the business wants to know they're going to be making money out of it. The management that are left in the business when you go, assuming you're the owners of the business or you're the vendors, the people who are left and the succession plan that's in place is critical as well. Make sure that you've got somebody to run the business, otherwise you'll find yourselves doing an earn-out, which, however, whoever tells you, whoever advises you is a good idea, it isn't generally. About 2% of earn-outs work out well for the vendors and 98% well for the other side, or they don't happen at all and the business doesn't work. More predictable revenues than less. Contract is better than perm. It isn't better than perm per se, but it is certainly more valuable in terms of you can actually see the revenues coming. If anyone's flown a perm desk, and I'm sure many of you have, as I have, you know you start every month on a blank, on a 0. You don't do that in contract, and that's the simple reason why you can actually see some revenues coming, and anybody wanting to purchase your business will want to see that there's perm in there. In my personal view, a 50-50 split at net fee income or GP level is perfect, and it's ideal if you've got your contract business being covering your costs, and your perm business making your profits. So that's why contract business is better than perm. Having a leading position in key verticals or markets. We'll talk a little bit about dissipation in a moment, but having a leading position in key verticals. If somebody comes looking for you, and I'm talking here about organisations that want to expand their portfolio, want to build their businesses, and they do exist, and they'll be back in the market at some stage in the future. they're only going to look at the top 2 or 3 in a sector, independent players in a sector. If you're number 20 in your particular sector and you don't shine, then you may market yourself and they may look at you, but they certainly won't come looking for you. And needless to say, I don't have to tell you that if you're on the receiving end of an approach, you're in a much better position than if you go looking for it. Start planning at the beginning. Get everything ready early. One of the things you'll hear from Dan, he won't mention this because he won't be talking about this, but one of the things that Dan did when we got involved in starting Cube 19 was that he determined that every scrap of paper, every legal document, every contract was going to be kept in one place in the lawyers. We'd have a virtual data room, so when we came to raise finance, as we are currently doing, with offers of over 3 times what we wanted, one of the reasons is that any potential investor can go and have a look at the data room immediately. The pack is about that big, and the company's been running a year, just over a year. It's very, very helpful getting all your stuff ready and start planning at the beginning. Don't wait until 6 months before you want to market to start getting your your house in order. And get the right team. You obviously need somebody to run the business, and you need some succession for them. You need the finance taken care of, and you need your ops taken care of. It'll vary from business to business how big that top team is, and it'll depend on the ownership of the business whether or not they're there afterwards and how important the succession plan is. One of the questions I get asked is, why would I hire a non-exec director? It's becoming more common and more frequent these days, so I thought I'd spend a little while just explaining how a non-exec director can add value. Well, first of all, they're there to add value. They're very cheap, especially me. They don't charge very much for the experience and knowledge you get. And their primary function is to protect and promote shareholders' interests. In all small companies, or not in all, but in most small companies, and most of you represent small and medium-sized enterprises, I would imagine, the shareholders and the management are the same people. But it's not always that the shareholders and management's interests align. So the non-exec director is there to try and make sure that the company is protected and the shareholders are protected. It's not just about the management wanting to go off and open 50 offices in Crewe, for example. In my personal view, management development is critical. Getting that middle management right, making sure succession is right, making sure you're in a position to be able to get out if you want to when the time is right. And to me, that involves mentoring and coaching the leadership teams. However wonderful recruiters are, and I've worked in recruitment all my life, so I know how wonderful recruiters are. It doesn't mean necessarily they're going to be good at everything else. So that aspect of what I do and what a good non-exec should do is critically important. Developing and then delivering or helping the team deliver a strategic plan, a genuine strategic plan that will take you where you want to go and where you believe you should be, is also very important. And what you get with somebody as old and grey as me is market intelligence and a network, which you don't have. Certainly the businesses I work with now, I have MDs, and I'm not going to mention any names. In fact, I think you're 11 days younger than my eldest child, aren't you? I really needed to remind myself of that. So, having been around a long time, I mean, one of the things you get with a non-exec is battle scars. And Stelios, I heard Stelios speak once, and Stelios said that in his early days in EasyJet, when he lost money on something, he used to describe it as school fees. So he'd spent his money, he'd lost money, but he'd realised that he'd actually learned something. So what you're getting is those battle scars, the fact that the lessons have been learned by somebody else, and hopefully you won't make the same mistakes under their aegis. Needless to say, I would say M&A. If you're interested in doing a transaction, then you need to be involved with people that actually know what they're doing and have done a little bit of it before. And lastly, I suppose, independent advice. When you run a business, especially if you have an ego, and I know that wouldn't apply to anybody in this room, but certainly I have met the occasional recruitment person running a business with an ego. You do have, sometimes you need somebody to tell you actually and ask you the questions and say, well, that isn't the right thing to do, or give you genuinely objective and independent advice. So other ways to increase value? A sensible and appropriate geographical coverage. It doesn't mean you have to go everywhere. It certainly doesn't mean you have to be everywhere in the UK. I'm talking to a business at the moment, specialist financial services business, putting together a strategic plan for them. They have a very particular niche. They're very good at it. They're certainly in the top 3 in London, which is the primary financial centre for what they do. But they're now looking, as a result of the planning we've been doing, at going to New York, Tokyo particularly, and then probably Hong Kong, and the Middle East and Frankfurt subsequently in the next 2 or 3 years. That will be for them perfect geographical coverage because the clients that they service are in all of those areas and not really anywhere else. So they don't need to be in Sao Paulo, for example, or San Francisco, whereas in other businesses they might need to be in those cities. So a good business will have sensible and appropriate geographical coverage and a logical spread of product offerings. I met a chap recently who has a business in Brisbane. Now, if you know Australia and you know Brisbane, Brisbane's not a big town. Yes, it's a city and it's the 3rd or 4th largest city in Australia, but it's still not a big town really. And he told me that he had 16 verticals. He offered specialist recruitment in 16 verticals. And I asked him how many consultants he had because that's an awful lot. He said 50. 50. He doesn't have specialism in 16 verticals. He's got lots. He's basically running a generalist recruitment company. The good news is he's realised that and he's now taking steps to address that by increasing his geographical coverage into other parts of Asia and also slimming down his product offering and getting his best people on his most productive products. Get yourself noticed using marketing, social media. You're going to hear lots about that. I'm not going to bang on about it, but it isn't just about getting candidates, using it to get candidates. Get yourself noticed. Yourself as an individual, if you're the leader of a business or leaders of a business, and also your business itself. Be out there. There's that dreadful expression, thought leadership, but if you're actually out there talking to people about the things they're interested in, they will pay attention to you, and it's always very helpful when you want to maximize your value on an exit. Using PR, trade associations, I mentioned APSCO earlier on, there are alternatives, I believe. Using networking events, conferences, the very fact that you're something like this shows that you're interested in the types of things that you need to learn from your peer group and from other people. And trade delegations, I can't stress enough. There are parts of the world where you can't do business unless you've met them, parts of Asia, South America particularly. You really need to be in front of people. You need to shake their hands and pass them a card and make sure that they know who you are, and then they'll talk to you. They won't take cold calls. It's not like recruitment was, sadly, 30, 40 years ago. 30 years ago. And the last one on this particular slide is get compliant, know the law. Now, this wouldn't have appeared 2 years ago in any presentation I gave about M&A or exit values or multiples or whatever, because up until then, I'd only run global recruitment companies, and I had, I don't know, thousands of contractors at any one time all across the world. And if I ever did ask the question, which frankly was rarely, are we okay, are we legal, are we compliant, I would always be told yes, and I just assumed the answer was correct. And now I know it almost certainly wasn't. So I want to just share a little scenario with you because I'm sure we've got some, well, I know we've got some IT recruiters in the room. So let's just put yourself in the situation. You've got a UK contractor. He's got his own limited company, UK limited company. He's got a 5-month contract. You've placed him in Germany. He tells you he's covered under the 183-day rule. He almost certainly isn't. The 183-day rule only applies to employees sent to work overseas by their employer, and it specifically does not apply to self-employed, independent, or foreign-owned one-man limited companies. And I'm not talking about one man and his wife, or one man and his dog, or his best friend. I'm talking about somebody genuinely, a one-man contractor. Also, inconveniently, as soon as that director of the company moves to that country, the permanent establishment of the company moves with him or her. So by becoming a permanent establishment, the company and its employees become tax resident in the host country. Now, I wouldn't have known this 18 months ago until I got involved with a management company and realised how bad we are as an industry at this. I mean, really bad. I'm not talking about the willful doing it illegally and knowing you're doing it. I'm talking about people not knowing what they're doing in their own companies, and some very big ones included. The risks of this, well, if you operate through a limited company outside of your home country, you will be liable for unpaid personal and corporate taxes if you've created a permanent establishment. Also, Germany, for example, if you lease out labour, you have to have a labour leasing licence. The fines for not having one can be punitive. So if you've got your own company, you lease yourself out, and you don't have a licence, you could be in big trouble. And if the limited company is not registered in the host country, the contractor can get fines, penalties, all sorts of backdated duties, social security and so on. In some countries, and this is happening now, this is happening on a regular basis in Scandinavian countries and a lot right away across Europe, the authorities will stop the contractor and, critically, the employment agency from working in that country anymore, and they'll deport them. We've heard of instances recently where Germany's deported contractors. There were 10 sent home from Sweden on the day they were due to start work recently because their paperwork was out of order. And if they discern, or they believe, or they can prove willful evasion, so using split income schemes, dodgy expenses cards, that sort of stuff, they can throw them in jail because that is deemed willful evasion. And it might only be a couple of weeks, but it's still pretty painful. I wouldn't want to spend a couple of weeks in a German jail. So it's a risk. Don't be aware of it. The last slide on key ways to increase value. Quality management information, very important. I've looked at lots of businesses, and the ones that I tend to pursue are the ones where I know I can see what's going on relatively quickly. Nowadays we have analytics. I won't steal any of Dan's thunder here to explain how it works and why it's so important. But if you can actually demonstrate visually to a potential purchaser or a potential investor in your business what your business is, what it does, it's much easier to progress a deal. If you can't, it's much harder. Nobody wants to be wading through piles and piles and piles of files and going through loads and loads of spreadsheets and trying to find out what the hell's going on. It's much easier if you can visualize it. Having a functional and efficient back office. It can be internal or it can be outsourced, it doesn't matter. But functional and efficient, it's got to work well. I have bought businesses without those, but only when I already had a central function that could take care of new businesses, a bit like landing a plane on an aircraft carrier. If you've got a good functional back office, your own infrastructure or outsourcing arrangements in place and it works well, you're much more attractive. Ideally, that will also give you below average fixed costs, below industry average fixed costs. Bit of nirvana, I appreciate that, but it's good if you can get it, and it's certainly something you should aim for. The opposite is converse, obviously. If you've got higher than average fixed costs, as the business I was talking to this morning, where their fixed salary costs are much, much higher than they should be for the industry, then it's going to be a big no-no to potential purchasers. Obviously, consistent positive cash generation. Nobody buys the business because of what you did in the future. They might base the multiple on the past, rather. They might base the multiple on that, but they're not buying it on the basis of what you earned, because you earned that. What they're buying is what it's going to generate for them in the future. So a consistent, visible, positive, obviously, cash generation. And opportunities for growth. Leave something on the table. There should be something left for any purchaser. If you talk to somebody that's never done M&A, they'll say you've got to sell at the top. If you sell at the top, if you genuinely sell at the top, then you wouldn't get anyone to buy you because there's only one way to go. What you want to be doing is you want to be leaving something on the table so that the potential is there for the purchaser. Very wise man, one of the richest men in recruitment, a guy called Andrew Banks. He used to run Morgan & Banks, now runs Talent 2, has made several fortunes and is worth hundreds and hundreds of millions. Put it this way, his house, he sold his house 18 months ago in Sydney. It was the most expensive house ever sold in Australia, in $56 million or something. He's a very clever man, as you might imagine. And he said to me, we were doing M&A together for TMP, and he said that the best deal was when both parties walked away mildly disgruntled. If one walks away punching the air, then inevitably the other side is going to be holding their head in their hands. That's not a good deal. It's a long-term business, and most of us are in it for the long term. However, whatever you might think about retiring at 35 or 40, if you've been in this industry for a while, you probably won't want to. You'll probably want to do something else within the industry, so it's as well not to burn bridges. So, and lastly, a few don'ts. Don't be non-compliant. If you've got 100 contractors and 50 of them are working illegally in the eyes of a potential purchaser, then they'll be discounted, or at the very least have very, very heavy-duty warranties and indemnities on you if that goes wrong, which would mean you could end up giving most of the consideration back. So look at that before you decide you want to market yourself. Don't overcomplicate. Try and keep what you do simple. Try and keep your messages simple. Try and keep your business model simple. Try and, Peter Drucker said once that if you can explain it to a 14-year-old in 2 sentences, then it's a business. If you take, as Andrew Banks, the aforementioned Andrew Banks, used to take 45 minutes to explain what TMP did, that's too long. That's not. You need to make sure it's concise. Don't overcomplicate. Keep it simple. We do this, this, and this. It's the old elevator speech principle. Don't generalize. It was in the presentation in the video beforehand. I was talking to Gary Watson of Investigo earlier. Pretty much everyone I talk to about the way to do it, you have to specialise. That may mean you picking things that, or doing away with things that you're doing now which are reasonably profitable. It's far better to specialise, get a name for it in that particular sector. Don't try and do too many things or be in too many places. And don't spread yourselves too thinly. Management resource is precious. Good quality management resource in our industry is rare. So make the most of it, and don't put it in the areas in which it's going to generate the most value, most profit, ergo the most value for you. And please don't try to hide anything. You have to assume, even if you think the people coming to you, approaching you are muppets, they're probably not. They probably will find out. I looked at a deal a few years ago. I can't remember if they're still in existence. I probably shouldn't say the sector. It was a legal recruitment business. And we did... we got quite a long way down the line. We were probably a month in. We were doing quite detailed due diligence. And we kept coming across this character who we'd never met. Very senior, obviously. He signed, this is how long ago it was, he used to sign photocopier leases and office leases and things like that. But we couldn't find him. He was very highly paid. He got a very big salary. And in the end, we took one of the principal to one side and we said, look, we're a bit concerned. We need to meet this guy. He's obviously quite important. And he admitted it was actually him. He was paying himself another salary and he had an alter ego within the business. Now, that raises a little bit of a whiff and you think, not quite sure about that. And then we started finding other little things and we start pulling at threads and walk away from the deal a couple of weeks later. I've seen all sorts of things on balance sheets. I've seen yachts, flats, mistresses, all sorts of weird and wonderful. I'm just trying to think. No, I probably shouldn't take that one. But there are a number of... You can... Obviously, it's private companies. You can do within reason what you like as long as your conscience and your tax accountant allow you to. But if you are thinking about selling, don't think that you can keep it hidden. Make sure you're very upfront about it. Disclose it, it's called. Disclose it early on. And that way, we're not going to find it. Whoever's coming along looking at the business isn't going to find it and start thinking you're a bit dodgy. And don't think it'll be a quick process. Even the best deals, even the most well-structured deals, will take a long time. If you can do a deal in 12 weeks, you're doing very well. As I said, there was a deal done recently, a big one, admittedly, but they've been running for about 2.5 years. I think my record was 14 months in terms of length, and the quickest was probably about 12 or 13 weeks. And I'd known I was going to buy in that business for years and years and years beforehand. So it isn't going to be a quick process. It is very time demanding of you. And last, and this is very important, please don't use inexperienced advisors. Even if they're your friends or they work with you throughout your career in recruitment or your career in building your business, and you trust them implicitly, if they haven't done deals in this sector, then get somebody who has. There are plenty of people out there. You've got Kevin speaking later on. Kevin and his firm have done a lot of transactions in this space, and there are numerous others as well, really good, experienced people. They know what they're talking about. Deals can be killed by inexperienced advisors. I did a deal. I bought a business called Lawrence Simons, and it's reasonably public knowledge that Lawrence Simons was an interesting deal. I think there's a bit written about it at the time. A very, very strong global recruitment business in legal, very good people. They were in about 16 countries. They were a very nice acquisition. The three main partners were lawyers. They were all qualified lawyers themselves, and they had their own lawyers. And then the firm had a lawyer. The LLP had a lawyer. We obviously had our lawyers. We had bank lawyers because some of it was bank funding, and we had the venture capital lawyers. And I was sitting in a room very late one night, or in the early hours of the morning, looking around and asked one of my analysts to work out how much I was spending an hour, because there were 23 lawyers sitting around the table. That deal got to the very last knockings, Good Friday, the day before Good Friday, and I had to get on a plane, so I wasn't going to be there, and if we didn't close it, I was going to pull the plug. I was persuaded not to, because one of the lawyers that was being completely obstructive, I was just said something very nice about you, Kevin. So I wasn't talking about obstructive lawyers when you walked in. It's completely coincidental. One of these lawyers was being very, very picky about a particular point related to his client's personal contract, and in the end, he had to dump that lawyer to get it through. The whole thing could have fallen over. It's a multi-million-pound deal. So please don't use experienced advisors. Inexperienced advisors. Lastly, word of warning. Most deals don't happen. There's a lot of hype talked about it, but a lot of them don't happen. only a small number of greater than £10 million deals are done. Most owners, or many owners, are disappointed or have very unrealistic aspirations. Be realistic. If you want to earn 10 million from your business, you've got to be earning between 2 and 3 in profit. And if you want to earn it this year, then you need to be doing it now. That's realistic. If you're earning 110,000, you say my target's 10 million, you've got an awfully long way to go. It'll be 20 times earnings to do that. It's not going to happen easily. However, if you do a plan and you do it right, and you get the right advisors, and you focus on developing your business in the way that your plan says it should, and you hit your numbers, the rewards can be very high.